At the age of 10, in 1968, my parents had moved to Belmont, Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston. I was one of 2 black kids in the entire area. I joined the Cub Scouts at the age of 10 at the invitation of some of my white male friends. And we had a march from Lexington to Concord to commemorate the ride of Paul Revere. My den mother let me carry the American flag. As I was marching down the street, somewhere along the parade route, I began getting hit with bottles, soda pop cans, rocks, and debris from the street by just a small group of white spectators mixed in with the all-white crowd on the sidewalk. This was the first time I ever experienced anything like this, and I did not understand. I thought perhaps those people did not like the Scouts. I did not realize I was the only Scout getting hit until my den mother and the other Scout leaders came rushing over and huddled over me with their bodies and escorted me out of the danger. They never explained why, even though I kept asking, why are they hitting me? Why are they hitting me? What had I done wrong?
We hate uncertainty. We hate to not know. We hate it. Think about horror films. Horror films are always shot in the dark, right? In the forest, at night, in the depths of the sea, the blackness of space, right? And the reason is because dying was easy during evolution, right? If you weren't sure that was a predator, it was too late. Your brain evolved to predict, and if you couldn't predict, you died. And the way your brain predicts is by encoding the bias and assumptions that were useful in the past. But those assumptions just don't stay inside your brain. You project them out into the world. There is no bird there. You're projecting the meaning onto the screen. Everything I'm saying to you right now is literally meaningless. You're creating the meaning and projecting it onto me. And what's true for objects is true for other people. While you can measure their what and their when, you can never measure their why. So we color other people. We project a meaning onto them based on our biases and our experience.
So at the age of 10, I formed a question in my mind. That question was, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? So I grew up in my adolescent years spending a lot of time buying books on black supremacy, white supremacy, the Nazis in Germany, the neo-Nazis over here, the Ku Klux Klan, anti-Semitism, trying to understand that ideology, trying to get the answer to my question, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? None of these books provided the answer. So then in my adult life, I thought, you know what? Who better to ask, how can you hate me when you don't even know me, than someone who would join an organization whose historical premise has been hating those who do not look like them and who do not believe as they believe.
Who cares? Why should we care? Well, consider conflict, which seems to be so omnipresent in our society at the moment. If you and I are in conflict, it's as if we're at the opposite ends of the same line, and my aim is to prove that you're wrong and to shift you towards me. The problem is, you're doing exactly the same. You're trying to prove that I'm wrong to shift me towards you, right? Notice that conflict is the setup to win, but not learn. Your brain only learns if we move. Life is movement.
I wasn't there to fight him. I was there to learn from him. Where does this ideology come from? Because once you learn where it comes from, you can then try to figure out how to address it and see where it's going. So, we carried on with this interview, no more incidents. I would invite Mr. Kelly to my home. He would come to my home. He'd bring his bodyguard. Bodyguard would sit on the couch next to him. Sometimes the bodyguard would get bored, pull out his gun, start twirling it on his finger like this, while Mr. Kelly and I talked. I would invite over some of my other friends, my Jewish friends, my black friends, my white friends, other people, just to engage in conversation with Mr. Kelly. Other than me, I want him to experience different people. This went on for a couple years. He did not invite me to his home, but He would have dinner or lunch at my table with me, this inferior person that he deemed not his equal. After a couple years, he began coming down to my house by himself, a national leader in the Ku Klux Klan. And then he began inviting me to his house.
What would happen then? To enter the conflict with uncertainty instead of certainty. And the second is in entering conflict that way to seek to understand rather than convince, right? Because everyone makes sense to themselves, right? And to understand another person is to understand the biases and assumptions that give rise to their behavior.
There you go. There's one rally, such rally, with a klansman that's conversing with the Klan at a rally. And there's a rally with the cross on fire. Now, they would give speeches, I would take more notes, and try to absorb and try to understand, not that I'm believing in what they're preaching, but I'm trying to learn and understand what is the impetus for it.
It's not unusual for blacks and whites to be friends, but it is unusual to find a black man and a Klan leader chatting pleasantly over an orange soda after a Klan rally. The relationship started over a book Davis was writing. His secretary set up an interview with Roger Kelly, but didn't tell him Davis was black. They talked and talked some more. Davis learning about the Klan, Kelly learning about Davis.
We get to know one another and we do different things, you know. It hasn't changed my views about the Klan, you know, because my views on the Klan's been pretty much cemented in my mind for years.
Kelly and his Klan friends go to hear Davis and his band. And Davis goes to their rallies.
I sat on the front row and listened to each Klansman speak. Some things I agreed with, other things I did not agree with.
Davis thinks that his presence promotes badly needed understanding.
Hate stems, I believe, from fear of the unknown. And I think this is all across the board, regardless of whether it's a Klansman or anything else.
But he has no illusions about the Klan. If he did, his friend would be quick to disabuse them.
And I believe in separation of the races. I believe that's in the best interest of all races.
Does he really? Or has friendship transcended the color barrier? Listen to Kelly at a Klan rally.
I'm a far right man to hell on back, because I believe in what he stands for and he believes in what I stand for. A lot of times we don't agree with everything, but at least he respects me to sit down and listen to me. And I'll respect him to sit down and listen to him.
The strange relationship of a KKK wizard and his black buddy. In Washington, I'm Carl Rochelle, CNN Sunday Morning.
But what if we could actually rescale ourselves, right? And find the impossible in the simple.
Respect is the key. Sitting down and talking, not necessarily agreeing, but respecting each other to air their points of view.
So my name is Beau Lotto, and I have the pleasure and the honor to have a conversation with Daryl Davis. And we come together around a number of things, and one of them in particular is how we can change the perception of people and facilitate people from very different backgrounds coming together through and maybe even because of conflict. So you personally, and also your work throughout many years, has enabled people to go to the very place they've evolved to avoid. You've enabled people, and yourself, I imagine, to engage in conflict that enables yourself and people with whom you have very different views to expand from those views. So could you talk a little bit about your work and how you've done that?
Sure. And I agree with you 100% there. And I would go on to add that, people only know what they know. And you're limited to what you know. Your perceptions are based upon what you know or what you think you know.
Yeah.
And then when somebody comes and tries to introduce something that is different from what you know, a conflict may start.
Yeah.
And so they're going to, defend their reality, of what they know. And so my job is to try to offer them or educate them, expose them to something that they don't know, to make them question their own beliefs. So A is not A. And that does not happen overnight because they have been inundated and saturated with a certain belief from however long they've been into this thing, whether it's, having to do with racism or some other hot topic that they believe in, say pro-abortion or pro-choice or whatever, it doesn't matter. They are solidified in that belief system. So my job is to offer some alternatives that they can think about, rather than my try to compel what I want them to believe. I want to compel them to think and decide for themselves.
If we're going to help someone see differently, the challenge there is for them to, again, acknowledge that they have an assumption, and then to challenge that assumption. But one of the things that your brain hates more than anything is not knowing. We hate uncertainty, right? Because during evolution, to not know was to die, right?
Right.
But more than that, if we then challenge an assumption or bias, that defines your identity, right? It's not just, I don't know how life began. Okay, well, maybe I can have assumptions about that. And I'm quite happy to let those go. But if you're challenging who I think to be true about me, you're asking people to step into a space of uncertainty that is possibly one of our greatest sources of fear, the fear of not knowing me. Because if I can't predict me, what do I have? So people often, when you offer data or evidence to suggest that what they believe is wrong, almost always they will hold stronger to that view than they did before. We actually shift them from almost a philosophy to a faith, because now they have no evidence from which to believe that. And once they go into faith, well, now it's very difficult. So in order to shift them and to get them to question their own identity, you have to create a space of trust. And what I hear from you is that you're actually seeking to truly understand them, to understand the other side, right? Because when someone feels like they're being understood, as you say, they then feel like they're being heard and listened to.
That's correct. And you used two words just now in the last sentence. You use the word faith and you use the word feel. You're taking them to a point of faith. They're questioning what they feel. Well, this indicates this person is an emotional human being. They're basing their reality upon emotion, how they feel about something, what they believe in, a leap of faith. So if this person is making a decision based upon emotion, then you cannot present data to that person because they're not data driven. I mean, they may use data for certain things, but they are predominantly driven by faith, which is all part of emotion. So you must bring an emotional alternative that is perhaps stronger than their emotional alternative. And if they resonate with that, then they will start working on changing their own perception, their own reality. If they are driven by data, then you cannot convince them by telling them what you feel. They want to see the data, the stats, the evidence.
Yeah. So you have to meet people where they are.
All right, so we have perceptions about each other. I know going into the room, this guy does not like me. He's probably not going to change. I just want to get some information from him. And he's thinking different things about me. But the more we converse, the more we build a relationship. We start off this far apart and we have a conversation and the gap narrows. We begin relating and continue more. We're heading towards, this is a relationship. This is adversarial relationship. And then we're heading towards a friendship. And by the time we get here, the things that we have in contrast begin to matter less and less, such as the color of our skin, or whether we go to a church, a synagogue, a mosque, or a temple. And that's where I try to bring people, but it doesn't happen in one sitting. It happens over time. I need those repeat visits. And the only way I get those repeat visits is through my authenticity.
Yes, I love the metaphor that you're using of coming together. It's something I also use in thinking about conflict, where I say that if you and I are in conflict, let's say, it would be as if we put each other on opposite ends of the same line.
First of all, we think we're on a line, right? And then we put ourselves opposite ends of that line. And my aim is to prove that you're wrong and to shift you towards me. And your aim is to prove that I'm wrong and to shift me towards you, right? But both of us, our aim is to not move, but to get the other one to move. And violence is almost like grabbing you and pulling you towards me. And toleration is a bit like, I'm not gonna move, but I'm okay if you don't move, right? But respect is actually having the possibility of moving towards you, right? But the problem is we enter conflict with the idea of certainty. I enter conflict with answers and certainty rather than with uncertainty and with questions. So I'm thinking, if you can do this process in a context of, in some sense, you could argue extreme conflict in that two almost diametrically opposed people and ways of thinking, surely people can do it with their partners, with their children, with strangers they meet anywhere, right? So I think what's really important about your work is both it's motivational, but there are principles that are grounded in the neuroscience of how we can then take these principles and say, look, you can do this anywhere. In fact, you need to, because this is the only way you're going to be able to thrive and adapt in the future, is if you engage in this way, right? And for me, it often begins that once you have awareness of how and why we see what we do, you get humility. Because it's not just that you have assumption biases, as you said, I also have them. And they come from my history, and etc. And I'm projecting them onto you. But we often engage with it, and it's like, no. Daryl has the assumption and biases, not me, right? Daryl's simple, I'm complex, but you're simple. But the problem is you do exactly the opposite to me. So once we have that humility, then we have the possibility of engaging in a different way. It doesn't mean I have to agree with you, but it means I have to, in order to accept another person's humanity, you have to appreciate where your own humanity comes from.
Exactly.